Hi, Fabian. Great to have you here. So everyone who's attending, this is webinar brought to you by MSP360 and Emsisoft called Protecting the Remote Workforce from Ransomware and Other Threats. I'm sure, as you all know, during these trying times with the pandemic going on that's global, you've probably had a lot of challenges with remote workers. If customers that used to all work in an office, now they're all working remote. And how do you get them all set up to be able to do that? But more importantly, how do you protect them from different ransomware threats and those types of things, as well as backup and disaster recovery? So that's what we plan on covering today. My co-host, Fabian Wosar, he's the CTO for Emsisoft. He's world-renowned when it comes to ransomware. In fact, I think he's got a bounty on him from a lot of the bad actors and the groups that want to find him. He's definitely a thorn in their sides. Fabian, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it's probably multiple bounties at this point of time, to be honest. So, yeah, as Doug already mentioned, I'm the CTO at Emsisoft. We are essentially like an anti-malware vendor over in New Zealand. However, only actually 2 or 3 people work in New Zealand since we are a fully remote company. We were originally founded in like 2003 in Austria. And the idea of how Emsisoft came to be was actually because our CEO, Christian, was working a normal office job and figured out that working a normal office job is absolutely not for him. So his idea was to create like a completely virtual company, so to say. So we only ever had a remote only workforce. So there's like no office, no headquarter, nothing. So pretty much the style of working that you guys are now being forced into kind of has been the way we have been operating for the past 17 years or so. We currently have like 41 employees in 16 different countries. So we are spread over a dozen time zones. So we are truly remotely. It's not like that we are still all living in the same time zone or even the same city, but we don't go into like a central office, but we are like truly global. And yeah, as Doug already mentioned, most of you probably know Emsisoft or my name because of our ongoing efforts when it comes to thwarting ransomware worldwide. And we are probably one of the biggest contributor when it comes to fighting ransomware and getting people's data back.
Yeah, and I know we've talked previously, and we did another webinar a couple months ago. And one of the things you guys do too is you try to get the keys and actually release some of these keys to this ransomware.
Yes. So what we are doing is pretty much whenever we see a new ransomware popping up anywhere, we do a very thorough technical analysis of what the ransomware actually does, and we try to break the cryptography used by the ransomware in order to allow any victims to get their files back without paying the ransom.
Which is why you have several bounties on you.
Yes, exactly. So at this point, we probably released decryptors for over 200 different ransomware families and variants. And we probably cost ransomware gangs over 1.5 billion US dollars in ransoms.
Wow.
So that's like one of the reasons why I personally prefer to keep like a very low profile online and like nobody really knows where I live and then things like that. So
yes, hence the reason we're not on video today.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I mean, maybe if we ever do another webinar, you can set up like a cat cam or something like that.
Yeah. Because you like cats, right?
Yes, so. I do.
So just a little bit in terms of MSP360. So in terms of how we operate as a company, some of us have always been remote, like myself, as well as several others. We've always worked remotely, so we have that mindset. But we do have a central office where all of our main office where all of our employees were that took care of our development as well as sales and marketing. So within that office, we've now had our own challenges in, having them work from home and making sure that they're set up. Luckily, because of the systems that we use for partial remote workforce, a lot of things we rely on are web-based. We have IP phones that are soft phones, and you can have it on your computer. So it really hasn't disrupted our operations too much, other than just kind of a new way of working. And because of that, we haven't shut down. We're still here for you in terms of backup. If you need anything for your customers, if you need support, all of those things still fully operational. So it's been interesting as we've gone through this, but I think we're going to come out stronger because of it. So what are some of the biggest threats that we're facing, during COVID-19? And Fabian, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this, right?
Yeah. So essentially, the biggest issue with getting people set up for remote work is that you suddenly introduce like a whole bunch of new systems, like new tools, new ways of working on very, very short notice, right? Essentially, a lot of companies were forced to pretty much set up their employees for remote work within like 1 week or less. So essentially what most companies are dealing with now is kind of, I would call it almost like makeshift remote work, where you have to cut a lot of corners and make a lot of compromises in order to keep your company running and keep your business open, pretty much.
Yeah. And you've got people at home, connecting their laptops to their home networks, which also have things like, smart home devices and cameras and all sorts of different attack points, right?
Yes,
So it's
pretty much. And that's like a huge issue. I mean, in a lot of cases, I'm not sure about the US, but here in the UK, where I live at the moment, it was completely impossible to buy like new laptops or even like normal hardware like processors for processors for a while. So even if you were I mean, in the perfect world, you would hand each employee like a dedicated work laptop, right? But
yeah.
that simply wasn't possible in this pandemic. So what you're dealing with is like a lot of insecure home devices, like home PCs, that are suddenly being used to access like your sensitive networks, and that are used for work. And you kind of have to deal with this additional kind of threat vector, pretty much. Now, the other thing is, since you suddenly introduce like a lot of new tools, people may not be familiar with like how the login screens will look like exactly, or what the URLs are exactly, which pretty much invites phishing, right? Bad actors are trying to get access to like all your remote work platforms, but it's not only that, it's also that a lot of bad actors showed up who try to gather enough information in order to apply for disaster relief funds that most countries have set up, and pretty much collect the money that the government provides to you as a business in order to keep you afloat during these trying times on your behalf. So that is definitely one thread that we have seen a lot recently. And of course, whenever there's like a big news topic that is coming up, and COVID-19 has been dominating the news sphere, so to say, for the past months, and will probably keep on dominating it for the coming months as well, there's a lot of malware spam that looks or like pretends to be new information about like COVID-19 from places like the CDC, the NHS, the WHO, and other places like that, who try to get you to either visit a compromised website or to open like a malicious attachment, who will then install normal malware or ransomware on your system.
Yeah, I know that's, I've heard a lot about, different things, and scam warnings, are going out constantly because it is just so easy to say, oh, hey, this is, the CDC and, you know, we need you to do this to protect your employees or to protect yourself. And they click on the link and bam, now they're infected, and you know, there's not much not much they can do after that unless they got some protection to begin with. But
and it literally happened within like 1 week.
Yeah.
Like 1 week before, like my spam folder was literally filled with like all those sextortion spam emails. Like, I know your password and you need to send like money there to this Bitcoin address, right? And within 1 week, it was like completely replaced by like fraudulent COVID-19 related things like, oh yeah, you have to apply to get like the disaster relief funds here at this site and stuff like that. So it's like they are very on top on on top of the current news and try to exploit pretty much any kind of new headline as soon as possible.
Yeah, they're definitely fast.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Let's go through here in, you know, just protecting, you know, how do we do that now that, you know, we know that these threats are out there. We know that we have these issues, you know, how do we go about protecting those remote workers? Because it obviously is very important now.
Yeah. And I mean, the biggest issue, as I mentioned before, is that we are currently operating, well, most of us are currently operating under like makeshift work from home arrangements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So while you can install like an EDR or like install like very restrictive policies and lockdown systems that your company that your company owns and hands it out to an employee, you can't really do that with like their family PC, right? They are already kind of all stuck together, and then imagine that suddenly Minecraft like doesn't work and like all the kids are going crazy, and yeah, you just can't do that. You don't own the hardware, so you can't just apply very restrictive group policies, whitelist solutions, and all those other fancy tools that you usually have access to in a like fully enterprise environment where you own all the hardware and where you can just say, yeah, I mean, we provide the hardware to you, so it's fair for us to dictate what kind of software you have to use and things like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely it's a lot more difficult when you got, you know, and also from an operating system standpoint, right? I mean, you know, people might still be running XP at home just because, you know, they've never upgraded or whatever. Right now, you've got to deal with that too.
Yeah, or maybe they still have like an old Windows XP box for their kids that they replaced their home PC with like a newer version, and they left like the old PC for the kids.
Yeah.
And now it's still part of the same network, and still has access to like the family PC and things like that. So it's like very, very difficult. And by suddenly allowing a lot of almost insecure systems, or like systems where you can't be 100% certain whether or not they are secure, access to your company networks and to your sensitive data is like a very frightening perspective for most system administrators out there, I would imagine.
Yes.
So like another issue is like quite subtle, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of it, but just out of curiosity, can we do like a little poll or like a little poll in chat? Does anyone here use like an EDR or one of those fancy next-gen AVs in their company or like their company networks?
I'm trying to add the question here right now. Just a moment. So it's you're talking about VPN devices?
No, like an EDR or like a next-gen antivirus application, like one does any one of you have those deployed in their companies and in company networks?
All right, so just a moment here. We're doing this in real time.
Yeah, we do. And I'm throwing Dak under the bus at the moment because
that's
that was
okay.
the plan.
Go. It just looks like a yes/no type thing, right?
Yes, it is. It very much is.
All right. So We will save that. And now if I go back to polls, launch polling, there we go. Sorry about that, everyone. So we're, oh, there we go. We're getting responses now. Let's see, once we get up to about 60% of you voting, we'll go ahead and close the poll. And I know some people, you know, are probably might be away from their computers.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
There we go. We're at 61%. I think that's good.
Yeah.
So it's 63% said no and 38% said yes.
Okay, so 38% said yes. So of those people who said yes, I mean, you can do like a little experiment and just connect like your children's systems to like that EDR, like install the endpoint protection client on those, and then just watch it. And what you see, it will be quite surprising to you, because a lot of these new modern EDR and like next gen antivirus products, they are very much tailored for the enterprise market. And when you suddenly expose them to the much more diverse field of like home computers, like all the stuff that people have installed on their home computers, you will be absolutely flooded with false positives. And not only false positives, stuff will stop working. There will be like a lot of incompatibilities and things like that. And the reason for that is quite simple. Well, in general, the reason why most next-gen antiviruses are targeting the enterprise market specifically is because machine learning is like very good when you can clearly define when you can clearly sort applications into groups. Now, for enterprise solutions, that's like, or like for business networks, that's quite easy, because like either it's like business software, or it's like operating software or operating system software, right? Or it's not. And when it's not, then it's most likely malicious. And when you start training like machine learning models using those data sets, then you introduce like a lot of bias into them. Now, in the consumer world, the software that you will find on those systems is like much more diverse, and you suddenly have to deal with applications like potentially unwanted programs and like adware that very much blur the lines between whether or not this is malicious software or whether or not that isn't malicious software. And also in a lot of cases, users actually in a lot of cases, users actually want to use that slightly shady software to begin with. There's like a lot of software piracy going on home computers. So it's like very, very interesting how a lot of these more modern systems who are designed for enterprises only start to react when they suddenly get confronted with like your children's home computers, or even with like the family PC at home. So that means in a lot of cases, all those fancy enterprise-only tools suddenly are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to protecting and securing your makeshift remote workforce. Also, as we mentioned before, you suddenly have to deal with like all these potentially already compromised systems accessing your sensitive networks and your sensitive systems and or your sensitive data. So the classic malware detection and remediation part is like so much more important than having like fancy graphs that show you all the relationships between the processes on those systems, so you can track back how it entered the system, because it already has entered the system. It's no longer about like tracing things back. It's already there. The EDR and like the next gen AV will get installed at pretty much at a point where the system may already be like fully compromised and infected. So yeah, that's like something to think about. Now, if you are using like a more traditional antivirus vendor who already had like an established market in like the consumer world or like the home user world, like big brands like Kaspersky, or even us at Emsisoft, right? We for the most part, we pretty much produced anti-malware software that was aimed towards the home user exclusively. You don't really have to worry about these kinds of things. However, if you jumped onto the machine learning bandwagon and believed all the marketing hype and like really enjoy like all those neat little buzzwords that people throw around, then you will come to like a very, very painful surprise if you ever try to roll this out to your remote workers at home using their home devices.
Okay, so it's kind of like there is no really good answer, because, you know, as you said earlier, the machine learning parts, they start learning on these new systems, but then it kind of throws that whole machine learning part off.
Yeah, because suddenly they need to deal with like completely different applications, and they will completely freak out.
Yeah.
Because I mean, machine learning kind of has like two parts. I mean, you can't use a machine learning algorithm to simply set it onto like malicious files and only train it using malicious files, because then it doesn't know what good files look like. You need to have like a separate test set that also contains like an almost equal amount of like good files to your bad files. So the machine learning algorithm can actually kind of figure out the difference between the two, right? What constitutes good and what constitutes bad. Now, obviously, if you are a company who mostly caters to enterprise software, to other enterprises, and like you sell to other companies, you sell your products to other companies, then you will make sure that like your goodware set consists of like all the standard enterprise tools, but it won't include like the Steam game library or like Minecraft or maybe even Skype. It may include Skype for business, but like not normal Skype.
Yeah.
So, or even Discord, right? All these tools that are like incredibly vital and incredibly popular on normal home systems, they are completely foreign on business PCs usually. So those next-gen antiviruses are generally not very well equipped to deal with them. And that results in a lot of false positives.
So, you know, one of the other things too, and, you know, anytime you talk about threats or issues or problems, is to talk about backup.
Oh yeah.
Which of course, you know, that's our specialty. But, you know, when you take something where, you know, let's say if you have an office-based backup that goes to a local NAS or something in the office, you know, that's all fine and dandy as long as people are in the office. But when they're out in the world at home, you know, they probably can't connect to that, and you don't want to be sending those backups over a VPN that might connect back to the office. So, you know, cloud really becomes crucial, I think, in terms of, you know, a backup destination, because, you know, you can't expect your home users to go out and buy USB drives to connect to their computers, and because, like you said, computer equipment is, you know, everyone's buying it all up, so it can even be difficult to get some of these things. So, you know, I think that's why, you know, obviously MSP360, we focus on backup and for MSPs, but, you know, when you look at a solution to be able to, you know, manage it remotely, be able to back up to the cloud, and then, you know, be able to recover then as well is extremely important. And I know you have a couple of points in terms of access points to the company's network and data, because yes, it's great to have a backup of the data, but if you're not locking down your endpoints and your networks, then, you know, you're definitely going to have some issues there. And, we've seen a lot of failures with MSPs that didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled, and they got hit because someone was able to get a password, log in as them. So I think multi-factor authentication for anything that you use, whether, like you said, collaborative, which would include your RMM, your PSA, your backup, all these things, you really should be using MFA across all of these systems, because if someone gets into that, then they've got access to to all your customers and all the endpoints that you've connected to it, whether it be in the office or at home.
Yeah, and it's not only that. I mean, a lot of people suddenly flock to systems like Microsoft Teams, for example. And Microsoft Teams is most likely hooked up to your local AD as well. So if people suddenly lose control over over their company Office 365 accounts, then there's a good chance they may actually be able to access like your local AD through that, especially if you use like the Azure AD, for example. Then in a lot of cases, people just had to set up like a VPN on very, very short notice. So they may have just gotten like one of those ready to use VPN appliances, for example. And these VPN appliances are actually kind of dangerous in a lot of cases. And there have been a lot of cases where companies got owned through these kind of appliances, because you always have to keep in mind that while appliances often offer you like a great deal of convenience, right? They are also essentially black boxes that you can't look into. You often can't patch them manually if there are updates available. You're always kind of reliant on the vendor doing like the maintenance for you. Or maybe you are an MSP, or maybe you are in one of those service companies who do the maintenance of the VPN appliances. So you will know exactly what I'm talking about. When you look at cases like the TravelX case recently, who went through the press and pretty much took down TravelX for weeks, if not months. They got owned through their VPN appliance. Like their VPN appliance had a vulnerability and there was a patch available. They didn't apply the patch, or to be more precise, like the company they bought the VPN appliance for didn't have enough technician to apply the patch to all their customers' appliances in a timely manner, and they got owned. So that is incredibly important so if you open like new doors to your company networks, right, in form of like setting up VPN servers, or a lot of users or like a lot of companies also opted for, oh yeah, we just let everyone remote into like their work PC from their home PC using things like RDP and other remote protocols almost, or like Citrix, for example. Citrix, by the way, also keep up to date with your patches. Like Citrix is one of the systems that is getting owned pretty much on a almost monthly basis at this point. So you want to keep on top on top of the patches. And the biggest threats outside of like known vulnerabilities that attackers may exploit are pretty much the user credentials. We all know our users, right? I mean, we know that users probably already have like at least a dozen other passwords they need to remember. So the solution for like this huge password chaos for a lot of users is to simply pick like laughably easy to guess passwords, or even worse, starting to reuse the same password like all over the place. And that's like a huge issue. And the way you can avoid that is like, well, first of all, you can implement like really strong password policies, but again, that kind of clashes with, yeah, but it's not even the company device, it's like my home computer. Why do you force me to like, I mean, that's it's complicated, right? So the best defense in that regard is pretty much to just roll out like multi-factor authentication. So it's not just like a username and password, but they also need to have access to like a security dongle or like even their smartphone that generates like a login code or the email address, right? And especially if you are an MSP, I think I mentioned it like in our last webinar as well. If you're an MSP and you ever get hacked, and through the RMM software, for example, that you deployed onto all your client systems, all those client systems get infected and owned by ransomware, there is no try again. Your company will fail. I have seen so many MSPs go bankrupt because literally overnight, they lost 60 to 70% of their entire client base and found themselves on like the receiving end of like plenty of lawsuits. So it is not something that you should take up lightly. If you're an MSP, you have like a huge responsibility for the systems of all your clients and their data. And it's important that you need to take that responsibility very, very, very serious. And when I then hear or like become aware that, yeah, that MSP got owned because one of their employees reused the password and they didn't have like multi-factor authentication enabled, then yeah, I'm sorry, but then it's probably better for that MSP to go out of business. So
yeah. And Jack in the chat, he brings up a good point is, with passwords is as humans, you can only remember so much information. And so you kind of, obviously you can't stop people from using passwords. You don't know what their password is, but and then they complain about multi-factor authentication. It's like, oh, I got to do this extra step in order to log in. So, we all want things to be easy and we all want things to be secure, but those two things don't match up.
Yes, they don't align. It's like
easy and secure don't work.
Yeah, you can pick one of those two in a lot of cases, but you can't pick both. It's like if it's easy, it's probably not as secure as it could be, or not as secure as it should be, and like vice versa.
Yeah.
But honestly, at least from my opinion, I don't think it's like a big deal to have or to require a user when they log in to pick up their phone and like press a button on their phone, right? It's not. I don't understand like the argument, and it like yeah, we can't. I mean, I literally had discussions with like a lot of RMM software vendors. I'm not going to name names. Who argued, yeah, so we tried to make like multi-factor authentication mandatory, but then like our customers complained that they don't want to type in like code every time or like pick up the phone and like press a button. And then maybe you want to fire those customers then, because one thing is for sure, you can see like some of those companies got owned in like very, very high profile ransomware cases. And literally within 48 hours, they rolled out mandatory multi-factor authentication for everyone.
Yeah.
Because literally every single press statement says, oh yeah, those got, oh yeah, you remember like those couple of hundred dentist practices who got owned? Mm-hmm. They got owned because they had product X installed. And it doesn't matter that it's not technically your fault as like an ISV, because you didn't deploy it. It was like a reseller or like an affiliate or like a distributor or some sort of partner. That doesn't matter. It's still like your company name that's being dragged through the mud publicly for the entire world to see, right? And it says, yeah, the ransomware was installed through your RMM software. Congratulations. So it's not... Yes, I can understand that you want to please your customers, right? And please your clients, but they need to understand that this is there for their own protection. It's not there to annoy them, even though they may feel like it. It's there for their own best interests.
Yeah. So, and as technical people, I think we definitely understand it, but non-technical people, they don't get it. It's like, why do I need a password for this? Why do I need a password for that? how do I remember all these passwords? You know, so it's a never-ending battle. Hopefully someday we'll have a surefire solution that will take care of it, but we're not there yet. So we got to make sure that we're all protected.
Yeah, and I mean, if you do have to deal with a lot of passwords, like I do, for example, I probably have like a couple of hundred different passwords.
Mm-hmm.
Just use like a proper password manager. They're like
Yeah.
very nice password managers out there who are completely open source. You don't need to trust like a cloud, because you can just deploy the cloud backend in form of like a Docker container on your own hardware. You don't have to trust anyone.
Yeah.
Just use those, roll usage of those. And by the way, these kinds of password managers, they have like a lot of benefits for companies as well, because a lot of these password managers have like enterprise features. So you can not only store your own passwords, but you can share the passwords with other people in your company, with other people in your team, things like that, which just makes it like more convenient for everyone. So,
Yep.
and the good thing is you then only have to remember like one password, which should be strong, like really, really strong. Like the last thing you want to happen is, yeah, use password as the password for your password manager. That would be kind of silly, but
Yeah.
it would kind of limit the amount of passwords you have to remember.
Okay. So we've got we only have one more slide here. And it's just it's a couple of links that both MSP360 as well as Emsisoft we both have resources. If you don't remember these links, don't worry. If you go to the homepage for either one of us, it's right at the top. You just click on it. You can see what's there. MSP360, we're giving you 90 days free for endpoints in terms of backup. So even if you're already a customer, if you add new clients, you'll get them for free for 90 days. We're just trying to make it easier, because we know that as people moved from the office setting where you had everything managed to the home setting, and now you need to add all these new endpoints to backup. You know, why should you have to pay for all that if you're already a customer? So definitely take a look at that, take advantage of that offer. I know, you know, Fabian, you guys have a whole blog series, and I'm sure you guys are you know, you've got free ransomware help for healthcare providers.
Yes, exactly.
So
since some of the ransomware gangs continue to attack hospitals in these trying times.
Yeah, even though they said they wouldn't.
Some did. Some
did,
but like,
yeah.
The ridiculous thing is that we know that one of the groups who pronounced, oh yeah, we will not attack hospitals. We know that they literally attacked a hospital.
Yeah.
And in another case, like a research facility who was like literally working on like a COVID-19 vaccine. Literally like 2 or 3 days later after they made that statement. So you can't really trust those criminals, and
yeah,
in general. And yeah, and if you suddenly see yourself confronted with having to deal like metric ton of false positives and like other issues like onboarding like a lot of systems, and your existing security software doesn't really handle those cases very well, you may give the Emsisoft Cloud Console a try. Most people pretty much love at this point. So yeah, you can try it out. We offer a free trial, and yeah, if you are a healthcare provider, or if you are in any way, shape, or form related to healthcare, meaning if you are, for example, an MSP who provides specialized services for healthcare providers, hospitals, doctors and stuff, and you have to deal with ransomware, please make sure to contact us, and we will provide our services completely for free as well.
Great to hear. So with that, let's go ahead and open it to Q&A. You know, we have Fabian here. He is extremely knowledgeable on a lot of these things. We have one question right now. I'm not sure if you're going to answer it, but Timothy wants to know, what do you use for FOSS Password Manager?
I use Bitwarden.
Okay.
It's you can find it on GitHub.
Okay.
And it also has like a homepage. I think it's bitwarden.com. Let me check.
Because you talked about free open source, and it's like, hey,
Yeah,
what do you use? It's free, yeah. And if you trust it, then
there you go.
oh, Bitwarden. Okay,
Bitwarden,
I
yes.
thought it was Bit1.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
No, Bitwarden.
Got it. Okay. So there it is. It's in the chat if you want to check that out. If you have questions, you can either use chat or the Q&A box. Either one will work. Doesn't matter here. Let's see. Here's another question. Will we see any movement in the way national governments are reacting to ransomware attacks and their role in 2020?
There actually has been a lot of movement, especially like at the end of 2019. Like for the first time ever, well, not for the first time ever, like, but for the first time, the FBI made like a big push to actually try to work with the private security sector in order to get a handle on the menace that is ransomware, so to say. Up to that point, the FBI was like kind of dormant, and the US unfortunately didn't participate in large-scale information sharing platforms like No More Ransom that pretty much the entire rest of the world is participating in, as well as pretty much every major security vendor, including us, in order to share information about like new ransomwares and like how to break them, to help law enforcement track down the perpetrators behind these attacks. Everyone was participating in there except for the FBI and the US, which was kind of a shame. But they kind of opened up and revised their stance. I know that also the Department of Homeland Security kind of started their own little investigation, and they mobilized a lot of financial aid in order to make sure that most municipalities are up to speed when it comes to securing their networks, because a lot of municipalities were hit last year, in particular. A lot of like very large municipalities as well. So it's not only like your small county in the middle of nowhere. No, it was like places like Baltimore, right, who have like hundreds of thousands of citizens, and
yeah, and Atlanta too.
Yeah,
billions of citizens. So
yeah, so it's not like, oh yeah, it's like a lack of resources. I mean, it obviously is like some sort of to a degree it's a lack of resources, but even like larger cities who have like much bigger budgets when it comes to these things got hit. And the biggest issue is that in a lot of cases the government already has like very, very strict guidelines, like IT security guidelines, when it comes to like municipality networks. But the problem is that nobody audits them. And even if they get audited, there are like no penalties at all.
yeah.
So you have like this huge catalog of like really good ideas and like really good practices that if all of those were implemented, ransomware probably wouldn't be an issue for them. But they aren't, and nobody checks whether or not they get implemented, and they don't get punished if they don't implement them. So nobody does.
Yeah, we didn't see it. We didn't see a whole lot of change in healthcare.
No.
Until what's the one HIPAA, right?
Yes,
I mean
HIPAA,
yeah, and that would okay. There's a penalty to that. So now you see all this HIPAA compliance and everything. Everybody scrambling to make sure everything's compliant, because if they're not, then there's large fines associated with it. And so, like you said, if there's no penalty, then there's no incentive to follow these guidelines. Yeah, there's guidelines, but no one's gonna charge you hundreds of thousands of dollars per incident if you don't follow them.
And
they're just gonna say, why didn't you follow our guidelines?
And I mean, we kind of have seen this sort of behavior a lot in just the normal enterprises and like the normal economy, right? Where oh yeah, if it's not mandatory, then you have like some management person sitting there who kind of weighs off, oh yeah, so when we implement like all the security, it costs us this much, and if we have like a security incident, it costs us this much. Like, is it worth it, kind of, right? And since you don't have this outside force who forces them to do the right thing, like greed and greed prevails in many cases, right? So
Yeah. So
they don't do it.
we have another question from Timothy here. If we don't mind. So in your experience, what is the most common vector for ransomware? What is the number one thing we can do to prevent these attacks?
So since we are like very much like business focused thing, or like this webinar like targets business audiences, I will just assume that you want to know what is like the number one attack vector for like companies and like municipalities and like professional networks, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there it's kind of three major attack vectors. Like one is any form of remote access, RDP being like the major one, but we
Mm-hmm.
also have like seen attacks through TeamViewer and like other remote access utilities like I think what was it called? I think Kaseya. Yeah, I think it's called Kaseya. That's like one major attack vector, like weak credentials and having like an RDP box open somewhere that is accessible from the via the internet, or have like your TeamViewer account hacked, which you granted access, you granted the right to access like various systems in your network, right?
Mm-hmm.
The next one is malware spam. So just the classic, you get an email with an attachment, you open it. The attachment then in the background downloads some sort of bots. In most cases, it's Emotet, TrickBot, or Dridex. What these bots do essentially is they act as a pivoting point where an attacker can issue commands to those bots in order to scan the system, as well like all the other systems connected to the same network, and look for information that may give the attacker an idea what kind of system they are dealing with, whether or not they compromise like a home user or an enterprise network, and then go from there. If it's like a home user and there's like a juicy graphics card in there, they may deploy like a coin miner, for example, right? If they
Mm-hmm.
find themselves in like an Active Directory environment with like lots of other systems, they will start deploying lots of interesting PowerShell attack tools and mimicards in order to steal credentials, and then move laterally to infect like all the other systems in the same network, and map out what kind of software you have installed, what kind of backups you're using, pretty much to get an even better idea of what is in your network than in a lot of cases the system administrators that are supposed to maintain these networks have.
Mm-hmm.
So once they decide to flip the switch and deploy the ransomware, they know exactly where they need to hit first. They know exactly where your backups are in order to hard delete your backups and or just corrupt your backups. They know exactly what kind of security software you have installed and how to disable it before they deploy the ransomware and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's like malspam. And the other one is spear phishing. Now, spear phishing is, you can think of spear phishing of like a very high sophisticated version of like phishing, where you specifically target like a very so where you first do like a lot of research into the person you're targeting, figure out what are people they usually communicate with, and then try to compromise those other parties, and then use their email accounts in order to send them the malicious attachments or get them to visit a website, for example. So those are like the three big ones.
Okay.
And what can you do to protect them? Well, spam filtering is like very, very effective against any kind of mail spam, as well as like user education, right? It's probably also a good idea to implement attachment filters, for example, for incoming emails, to drop attachments like Word documents that contain macros, for example, things like that. RDP and like any kind of remote access limit. Well, the best is just don't use it. Turn it off if you can. If you can't, turn it off because you need to use it, right? Or that's the way that you actually maintain the systems for your for your clients, then at the very least limit the IP ranges who can access those systems to make sure that only like trusted networks can access them, and yeah, use multi-factor authentication, right?
Okay.
And for spear phishing is like very difficult. Like again, attachment filters, things like that can work, but it is also like a good idea to. There has been a big issue with CEO fraud. I'm not sure if you're like familiar with the term, but where like con artists send emails that look like they originate from your CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Tell them, oh yeah, can you wire this amount of money to this other place to pay like a bill or something, right? And then people do that. And the way to combat that was simply to implement workflows that involve like confirming the actual transaction through like a quick phone call, for example. That before your accountant sends out the large sum to whoever, they just call you and you say, yeah, that's fine. And you have like this second way of confirming.
Yep.
And the same can be used for spear phishing as well. Like if you suddenly receive like an attachment from someone, even if you know, and even if you may kind of expect that attachment, maybe send them like a quick WhatsApp and say, hey, I just got like the attachment, is that from you? And then they can confirm it or deny it, right?
Yeah.
So that's always useful.
Okay. So we actually have, there's two questions in the Q&A. They're basically related. Hem is asking, they have a multi-OS environment, Mac, Windows, Linux. What's a good option for cloud-based antivirus, malware software, and patch management? And then John he wants to know, can you talk how your products would be specifically deployed, example of what's typical to protect remote workforce from ransomware? So they're somewhat related. One's asking about cloud-based, multi-OS, and the other one's asking you to be more specific about Emsisoft.
Yeah, so our product line isn't multi-OS just yet. We may introduce, well, I can't really announce it, but we may introduce it like somewhere down the line sometime. But yeah, at the moment we are like Windows only. On the other hand, specifically deployed, what's typical to protect the workforce from ransomware. Now, the most interesting aspect about ransomware is that ransomware is actually very at like the very large stage of the attack chain. Like at the point where the actual ransomware gets deployed, as I mentioned before, the attackers already know the network exceptionally well, and they know exactly how to turn off all your defenses. So the best ransomware protection is actually deploying a solid malware protection to kind of stop like the Emotet, the Drydex, or the TrickBot, like the bot malware that is deployed by the attackers in the first place in order to do their initial reconnaissance. Now, another aspect that is quite important and that actually is quite useful is you may want to consider uninstalling PowerShell from all your endpoints. So uninstalling PowerShell will stop so many attacks in like the earliest stages. And the good thing is, especially for like work from home workforce that uses like their home devices and like their own devices, is they probably never use PowerShell to begin with. So they probably won't even miss it. I know that like a lot of RMM endpoints heavily rely on PowerShell.
Yeah.
And that a lot of MSPs heavily rely on PowerShell. So it may not be the kind of advice that you want to hear, but you always have to keep in mind that all these incredibly powerful management tools, once a system is compromised, they will be used against you. And that's like also one of the main reasons why two-factor authentications, two-factor authentication for your RMM software is so incredibly important, because it will be used against you. They will use it to turn off all the antivirus software everywhere. even uninstall the antivirus software everywhere, like push the ransomware to all the systems and execute the ransomware automatically on all the systems. So yeah, those are like the two advices that I can give. Like deploy good and solid anti-malware software on all the systems in order to interrupt the attack chain as early as possible. Then kind of try to reduce the amount of weaponry that's available in your network in form of PowerShell. If you don't want to uninstall it, or if you can't uninstall it, there are like plenty of ways how you can at the very least restrict it. So not everyone can use PowerShell, and that scripts need to be signed, things like that. And then of course, an almost equally important part is backups when it comes to ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
Backups. And always remember like the 3-2-1 rule, right?
Yep.
3 copies of your data on like two different locations, or like places, so to say, and one of those places needs to be remote. So, and
like the cloud.
Like the cloud, for example. Exactly.
Great. So what about Emsisoft specifically? Do you kind of have a, how your products are typically deployed for a remote workforce?
Yeah, so you can either deploy our software remote via Active Directory, which is like a new feature we actually only introduced like a month or so ago.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can simply send all your users invite links, or give them, just hand them like the installer executable that is specifically generated for your workspace, which is kind of the overarching kind of entity in our system. Like you can have multiple workspaces, you have like multiple groups of computers that you can all manage and push policies to, and do all those neat fancy things with.
Yeah, and you can, like for MSP360, you can do something similar. So you can set up the user, put their email in, then send them a link to download the software. Once they do, they put in their email address, and now it's linked into the system. So now you can manage it remotely as well. So that's because a lot of times when you have the remote workforce and people at home, you don't have your RMM deployed out there. So you need other ways to get software out to your customers, and being able to email them a link and say, download and install this, register it, and then I'll be able to do it remotely is going to be key.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, you can't just join like a home edition of Windows to like your AD to begin with, because you can't join a domain with it, right? So AD deployment is probably out of question for in a lot of cases. But yeah, you can just send them an email using our cloud interface, or and the same seems to be true for MSP360 as well.
Yes, and then I think we have time for one more here. It's top of the hour, but we'll go ahead. Joe says, no one is enforcing HIPAA here in the US. How do you get medical offices to take notice? Another part was, can you post the Emsisoft resources here? I posted a link in the chat to the link that was in the presentation. And then he asked about some of your competitors. We'll see if we can get to that. But in terms of HIPAA and enforcement, when I saw the question, my best thing was, well, if they haven't been hit with a fine, then what you need to do is go out and find examples of medical offices that have been hit with fines, where it's written up or something, and then share that with your customers to say, look what happened to, Bob's dentist office down the street. They got, they had a HIPAA violation. It cost them this much money. Or, it doesn't even have to be in your own hometown. It could be some, in another city or somewhere, but, compile these resources and say, this is why it's so important. Because I think until people see a possible impact to their bottom line, they're not going to do anything. And it's just like insurance, right? We all have home and car insurance. We hope we never have to use it, but we have it anyway. We pay for it every month or every year, depending. And these protections are very, very much the same. You have to protect yourselves. You have to be compliant. And if you're not, then it's going to cost you money, and lots of money. So that's one way. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
And again, it's like very important to make people understand that like these guidelines and these well, in case of HIPAA, it's not actually guidelines. It's like those are like very strict rules, right? They don't exist to annoy them. They exist to protect both the companies as well as their clients as well. I mean, people just need to, I mean, you probably know someone in your family, or maybe even you, who have medical conditions, for example, in case of HIPAA, right? That you don't want to be shared publicly with pretty much anyone, whether or not that's like a past STD case, right? Or some ailments or illnesses that you think could negatively impact your future job opportunities, which in a lot of cases that has been the case, where people that had like their medical information leaked got skipped over when it comes to promotions, because it was already kind of clear that they would probably have like a lot of sick days in the future or in the near future. So these guidelines exist to help both the companies as well as like all the clients of those companies. It's important to make companies understand that. And I know that's like a tremendous task, and it's like a very, very difficult task. And I also know that when it comes to HIPAA violations, the organizations that are supposed to enforce these rules and like to hand out these fines are often chronically overworked, and it's very difficult to make them notice you. But you should keep on trying to contact them and reaching out to them if you become aware of like blatant violations to the current existing law. And it's not only HIPAA, it's also GDPR. Like GDPR is like great, and like everyone was like bitching and moaning about it. But the reality is every single ransomware incident is also a GDPR incident, because ransomware needs read access to data. And if there's only like a single user email there of like a European citizen, it's like automatically a GDPR incident. And GDPR incidents, they include fines of up to 5% of like the yearly revenue, like not the profit, like the revenue. So, but nobody seems to be enforcing it at the moment, because in a lot of cases, these laws, they had like very good intentions, but they are also kind of a gray zone, and nobody's like really clear on whether or not they are even enforceable, or if they are even compliant with like the local country's laws and things like that. So it's like very difficult, but that shouldn't kind of stop you from it shouldn't stop you from keeping, well, sorry, I'm not an native guy. No, sum it up. It shouldn't stop you from keep reporting them. That's what I wanted to say.
And I don't know, Fabian, if you want to comment on any of your somewhat competitors directly or not. I'll leave that up to you.
In general, I know that like as someone who is attending like a webinar like this, like, yeah, what do you think of Access? Like a question that's like very, very interesting to you. But to be completely honest with you, I have never used any of the products. I can't say. I couldn't even tell you whether or not we are better than them or the other way around, because the thing is that, and this is actually one of our guidelines, is we don't really care what other companies do. We mostly care about like our customers and doing the best to protect our customers and our users, and not jump on like every bandwagon and do like everything other companies do. Because if we did, then at this point, Emsisoft anti-malware would include like a VPN, like registry cleaner, and like deep bloater and like an update manager and like all this other kind of bloat that has absolutely nothing to do with keeping your systems malware free and keep them free from being compromised, but that people added because other companies added them, and yeah, it's like ridiculous. So
Okay.
In general, we don't really comment on other companies, not because we think we are like above them or anything, but because we simply don't really care. We care mostly about our own customers.
Yeah. And you know, it's always, you know, everybody's, how are you versus the competition? So, but, you know, I think in terms of, you know, today we're a little bit over our hour session. I really appreciate everyone who've stuck on to the end. Quite a few of you have. Fabian, thank you again so much for your wisdom and your insight. Always enjoy these sessions with you. So hopefully we'll be able to do another one again in the future.
Sure, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, great. Everyone, thanks for joining. And if you have any questions, you will be getting a follow-up email after this, I think probably from both MSP360 as well as Emsisoft. And if you have any questions on resources, feel free to reach out to me, doug.h@msp360.com. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and if you have any other questions for me, you can reach out on Twitter @fvosa, so essentially like my first name initial and my last name. Or you can also just send me an email at like fabian.vosa@emsisoft.com.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.